Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range, a rootin' tootin' BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate Westerns for the whole month of June, reading Westerns and having a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun. I tend to max out on Westerns during the month. I don't read them the rest of the year. Instead, when I find them for $1 at the bookstore, I would just get them and chuck them on a pile, and they go on my night's reading at the end of the night. And I've had some ups and downs in this June on the Range. We still have a week to go, so I have plenty of time to have more ups and downs. But last night and the night before last, I have been reading the man who is synonymous with Westerns, Louis L'Amour. I'd read a handful of his, probably 24 of his books before the first June on the Range. I'd read them, before YouTube existed, and liked them just fine. I liked them just fine. I was, even in the 90s, I was impressed by the fact that Louis L'Amour was so reliable. You get a Louis L'Amour book, any kind of book, contemporary murder mystery, contemporary cop story, his famous memoir, historical novel like the Walking Drum. You get something like that in addition to his westerns. You know you're going to like it. It's going to be solidly put together. I didn't really think anything more of that, and I probably should have. June on the Range, and reading all the westerns that I've read for June on the Range has really cued me into the fact that it's easy to do this stuff badly. I should probably have paid more attention to the fact that I had never read a Louis L'Amour novel I didn't like. That's no small thing. And now I know that. Now I pay attention. Now he is the lord and master of the genre. And I read another Louis L'Amour last night. I read something. I went back to the 1950s. Not this particular paperback. This particular paperback is from the 1970s, which is 50 years ago. And it took a reading, and it's still in one piece. This is KilKenny by Louis L'Amour. In this particular livery here, he's looking at those two men there, and you know that there's a drama there. He's had different designs for his books constantly. I think that I have probably lived to see the last new paperback design of Louis L'Amour that will ever be. I don't know that his books will be brought out in paperback, in mass market paperback, ever again. Maybe trade paperbacks down the line. But I remember I worked in retail bookstores for a long, long time, and I went to them for a lot longer time than that. And I would always note, the new Louis L'Amours are out. Not the new books, but the new design. Do I like it? Do I not? I don't particularly like this design. The big fancy bit of his name, I don't particularly like. And I don't think he would have liked it either. I don't know. That probably there's a record. He was alive when this came out. Probably there's a record of his reaction. Or maybe he was just too diplomatic, too nice a guy to bite the hand that feeds him and criticize the new edition of his American paperbacks. I think the more I learn about the man, the more I think that he wouldn't have wanted to dominate the cover of the book so much with his own name. But the story in here was terrific. Oh my God. Another Louis L'Amour novel I absolutely loved. This is the story of a man named KilKenny, a man named Lance KilKenny, who, with the opening scene, is classic Louis L'Amour. He rides out of nowhere, out of the lava fields, into an unsuspecting town. It's a tall, slim, green-eyed man with dirt and sweat and on his clothing and a wound in his side and guns strapped to his legs. And that means something. If you're wearing a gun at your belt, or if you've got a rifle in your saddlebag, that's one thing. But if you've got guns strapped to your legs, that means you're a gunman. That means that you use them. It attracts the attention, almost immediately in this book. Later on, it attracts the attention of a sheriff in a town that KilKenny goes to. He says, we get trail people and cowboys all the time throughout here, but we get a stranger in town who has guns strapped to his legs. I make a point of getting to know him. This stranger comes to this town, sees to his horse, goes to the local dry goods store and makes an order of what he needs, and then goes to a saloon/restaurant to get a meal. And he catches the eye of a tall, beautiful woman who naturally is going to show up elsewhere in the book. he catches her eye, and she exclaims. He sits down to his meal. He doesn't want any trouble. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He sits down to his meal, and she exclaims, "Oh my, you're wounded." He says, "It's just a scratch." Of course, he says, "It's just a scratch." And she says, "Well, it could be serious. You should have it seen to." And he says, "I will." But he wants the subject dropped. And she gets that. But there are other people in the room. There are other diners in the room. And one of them is a rowdy young boy, a young man, who comments that, yeah, it's a wound, and it looks to me like you got it running away. And no matter how much Lance KilKenny wants to be left alone, this is still a Louis L'Amour novel. So he looks at the young man, and the look is enough to make all the people around the young man duck for cover. But not the young man. He's standing up, and he's got guns. And KilKenny says to him, "If you meant that as a joke, say so." And the young man says, "I didn't mean it as a joke. I meant it seriously. I think you got that wound running away from something." And his hand is moving towards his gun. Everyone in the room is watching. There is no doubt whatsoever that the young man is going to draw his gun and shoot this stranger. KilKenny is, of course, much faster on the draw than this kid and shoots him dead right there in the room. The beautiful woman yells, "You murderer!" But it's mainly just shock. KilKenny, of course, bundles up his food into a napkin. He's not going to stay and eat after he's killed somebody. And he goes to the dry goods store. The man who runs the dry goods store has run it for a long time. He's seen a lot. He is not a flighty city slicker at all. And he says, "I watched the whole thing. That was a clean killing. No hint of blame can fall on you, but you're still in big trouble. Because that was the golden boy, that was the son and golden boy of a real rotten customer in this area. He's not here now, but he will be here. And he's not just tough and also a good gunman, he's also a politician. He's oily and slick and smooth." Louis L'Amour uses all these words. I swear, you can be the most bloody-handed desperado anywhere on the plains, and he will describe you that way, but he reserves a special tenor of contempt for politicians. And this guy, whose son KilKenny has killed, is one of those. This is going to be trouble. It's going to be trouble. The shopkeeper tells him he's going to hunt you down. You're going to die or he's going to die. But he's not going to forget this, and he has a long reach. KilKenny listens, and he's grateful for the advice, but he intends he's going to go his own way. He knows what he wants in this new country that he's come from. He's come from fire and death, and also from the American Civil War. At one point in the book, a character says, "Well, you should be careful about so-and-so. He rode with Sheridan." And without missing a beat, and it's a surprise to the reader, KilKenny says, "So did I." But he knows what he wants. He wants to leave all that behind. Unfortunately, he's leaving behind the woman he loves. He's never going to hear from her again. Sure, that tall, beautiful woman in the saloon was pretty, but she wasn't anything compared to the woman he loved and lost that he'll never see again. But now that he's left all that behind, he knows what he wants. And he finds a peaceful valley far from anywhere and decides to set up shop there, decides to build a house there, even though he camps there. He looks at this whole area. He camps there, and in the morning he sees the sign that not only have mountain lions come to where he was camping out of curiosity, but he also sees fresh grizzly track. Why you would want to camp in such a place, I don't know, but I've done it, and he does it. He intends to build a homestead there and cattle ranch in a small way. All by himself. Doesn't want any trouble, doesn't want any contact with anybody. He does need to get supplies from time to time in town, and when he goes to the nearest town, which is a different town from the one that he entered in the beginning of the book, when he goes to the nearest town, he learns two things that are of supreme importance. One is, first of all, he sees that beautiful woman from the previous town in this new town, and they actually speak. And he apologizes for upsetting her, and she apologizes for yelling out, "You murderer." She's seen what she's been told, she saw what she saw, and she's been told what it was. And she says, "No, you had no choice but to act the way you did." So they're on good footing. But in addition to that, he learns that his lost lady love is in the area. She has set up a ranch nearby. She's alive and doing well. He's told that she is a formidable character. that she rides Western like a man and knows how to use a gun. And he learns one other thing, which is that this new town, the town that he is going to frequent, obviously because the beautiful woman from the stagecoach is in town, and also because supplies are in town, and also because the town will be the hub where he will meet his lost love. He learns that this town is run by someone, by a strong-armed guy who has a whole bunch of the worst dregs of society in his orbit and in his employ. So the book is set up by the halfway point. You have not only this strong man in this new town, but also the man whose son he killed, who's out there somewhere to be dealt with. And they are dealt with. This, you know, in a Louis L'Amour novel, you know that the hero is going to get beaten up really bad, but that he's going to prevail over everything. And usually in a Louis L'Amour novel, there will be two layers of things he has to prevail against. There'll be two bad guys, more or less. The elements, yes, and wild animals, yes, but there'll be two bad guys, usually. And usually in a Louis L'Amour novel, especially in his heyday in the 50s and early 60s, the two bad guys will be very different kinds of bad guys. They won't just have different names. There'll be two different kinds of things to deal with. One of them, at least, will always involve a physical confrontation at the end of the book, and this one does. The other, maybe not. The other will be a worse and usually a deeper kind of evil. And in this case, in this book, which is there's also an added element which is not usual in a Louis L'Amour novel, at least that I know of, which is competing love interests. Very odd, because Louis L'Amour set the tone. Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey set the tone for the rather virginal, embarrassed Boy Scout attitude towards women that prevails in these books. It's aw shucks, and the hero blushing all the way to his hairline if a woman so much as looks at him. Of course, they're going to end up married to these women, but it's a weird kind of thing. It speaks a lot, I think, to the Western serials, in not breakfast cereals, but serial adventures in the movie theaters, where you go and, you know, there's a main feature, but first you have some serials that you can sit through. And there, the cowboys all live together. They sing. They sound very much like castrati, and they're very embarrassed around women. Certainly, there's no hint that women could be their equal in any way at all. That was another refreshing element here, is that Nita ends up being a very formidable character. She's not going to hide in the back when KilKenny is in danger, and that's great. That's terrific. And Louis L'Amour does a lot with that. This was just a hugely enjoyable book. But in addition to being hugely enjoyable, I loved it. I don't think there's any doubt that my book tonight will be a Louis L'Amour novel. I don't think there's any doubt of that. I tell myself it's out of guilt because I bought all those cheap paperbacks, but it's not out of guilt. It's not. I'm as prone to book guilt as anybody else, but it's because I know I'm going to enjoy it. And how much can I say that about the rest of the night's reading? There's 2 new releases on my reading for tonight already. I'm almost certainly going to hate them to my back teeth. The idea of putting a new book to me on that list that I know I'm going to enjoy, that's too tempting to pass up. But in addition to all of those elements, to the fact that I know that I'm going to enjoy this, I enjoyed the hell out of this. I'm also reading these things with one eye detached for the qualities of Louis L'Amour, for the reason that made him so appealing to 2 generations of readers. How many of you, over the years of doing June on the Range, have emailed me with stories about your father or your grandfather who had all of Louis L'Amour's novels, sometimes in really nice faux leather reproduction volumes, read them all? How many of you told me wonderful stories about when you were a little tadpole reader and you had books of your own, but you knew that your mother had books on an upper shelf that you weren't allowed to touch, and your father or your grandfather had a little room off the living room or at the top of the stairs where he would withdraw that had a whole bookcase of Louis L'Amour. And what a wonderful thing that was for you. You weren't allowed to touch them. But what a wonderful thing it was for you to know that someday maybe you could graduate to that cave of treasures. I've heard so many of those stories from you all over the years of doing this great event. And I like to figure out why that is. Now, I know on one level that I've probably already said why it is. This guy doesn't fail you. He just doesn't fail you. Even when it's a knock-together novel that is an expansion of a short story and really not all that energetically thought out, it still doesn't fail. You're still going to enjoy. It's going to be an hour of reading that you're going to be really happy you did. But I try to look at deeper stuff than that, and there is an element of that here. We don't learn a lot about KilKenny in the first half of this book. We learn a lot more about him later on. But in the first half of this book, he is relatively anonymous. He's hiding from his past, and we know that he has an extensive past to hide from. But he is an easy example of a character where the reader, a middle-aged businessman taking the train from Chappaqua every day, could inhabit him. Where that man buys these things maybe on a subscription. You can get. Oh no, this one doesn't have it. Some of my Louis L'Amours have a subscription card in the middle, where you can just sign up and get a Louis L'Amour delivered to you every month. The main character here is easy for that kind of reader to inhabit. That's one reason why this is so easy. But when you're inhabiting that character, you want that character to speak to something deeper than just the plot of the novel. And that happens in this book. That dream that I mentioned that KilKenny has, where he rides over a crest and sees a virgin valley, a place that no one has lived, except cougars and grizzly bears, and also rattlesnakes. They don't got mentioned, but I'm sure they're there in multitudes. He sees this and decides, with my own two hands, without wanting anything from anybody, I will make a home here, and then eventually a business here. And I want to read here. I'm getting in the habit of reading Louis L'Amour to you, but I want to read the way he invokes that in this book. Riding on, he, that is KilKenny, studied the valley. To the right and left lay towering ridges that walled the valley in, and to the east other peaks lifted, and west the valley swung hard around, and at one corner the wall was broken sharply off to fall sheer away for more than 600 feet. KilKenny paused long upon the lip, looking out over that immeasurable distance toward the faraway line of the purple hills. It was then that he first became conscious of the sound. A faint, scarcely discernible whispering. Holding himself erect, he listened intently. It was the wind, the whispering wind. Wind among the tall pines, among the rocks and the erosion-gnawed holes, a sound such as he had never heard, a sound like far-off music in which no notes could be detected, a sound so strange that he could not stop listening. He turned then in his saddle and looked back over the valley he had found, at least 2,000 acres, grassy and lush with growth, water aplenty, and that whispering, the valley of the whispering wind. To those put-upon businessmen in the 1950s, taking the train from Chappaqua, the wife at home, the two kids where he's wondering how on earth am I going to send them to school, a boss that he hates, quarterly reports that he has to finish out, how many of those men who were the original audiences for these books, how many of them didn't dream about just riding out and finding the Valley of the Whispering Pines? How many of them didn't find that, didn't want that? I have to think that and also KilKenny's complete self-sufficiency, I have to think that was a large element of what made this author so incredibly appealing to so many readers. I no longer have that wandering urge, and I've been in a lot of those valleys, and to me, the appeal of them drops off significantly once you make your first mention of grizzly bears. But I get it anyway. I feel it anyway. So that's your June on the Range book for today, is KilKenny, and I loved it. Like I said, unless a wild inspiration strikes me, I am going to move on to another Louis L'Amour tonight. I get it, is what I'm trying to say. Whatever those guys felt 50, 70 years ago, no matter whatever they felt that made this author one of the best-selling authors in the world, I get it. I absolutely get it. I might differ from those guys in a lot of ways, but I don't differ in this way. And I'm going to want a sure thing tonight. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, and I'll report back a little further on down the trail. Thank you, BookTube.